Hi everybody, if you can see me and hear me, let me know, give me a little wave, and hopefully we can have a nice good connection this afternoon. So let me know if oh thanks Catherine, you can see me, that's good to know. So rugby, eh? Okay, so thank you, hello Tish, hope we are all well this afternoon. It's quite close in York. It's not incredibly warm, so I may stop at some point to put my jumper on. But you know, it's going to close in. We've had some sorts of strange weather. Really, it's all rain. Southern Europe is basking in uncomfortable and terrifying heat levels, whilst we are sort of on the other side of the Gulf Stream, the jet stream. I forget which, but kind of where the cool air meets the warm air, you get a lot of rain, which is where we are. But actually, through a lot of Central and Southern Europe, it is very, very warm indeed. So I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands. Natalie, you must give us a weather check, but I know they've been having unseasonably high temperatures. So we're not there, and it's not hot here, but it does feel quite close. What is it like in Scarborough, David? Are you? Is it quite a little bit oppressive and close where you are? I think you're in Scarborough, David. Have I got that right? If not, I apologise, and we'll make amends. Do my best to make amends. So do let me know what the weather's doing where you are. So it's overcast here. It's not especially warm, maybe 18, 19 degrees, but it feels close, if you know what I mean by that expression, in terms of atmospheric pressure. Feels like it wants to have a good rain, but we've had that for days and apparently it's not going to. Wow. Excuse me. That's amazing, Roberto, 100 degrees. I hope you feel comfortable with that. That's not something I easily kind of adapt to, that kind of heat, but hopefully you are seasoned. Hi, Leslie. Warm and windy in London. Okay. So, hi, Emma. Good to have you on. Good to see you. Carol Sue. A tornado watching Connecticut, right? Okay, not hugely surprising. I mean, it seems to have some crazy weather wherever you are, isn't it? So, David just dodged a downpour. Sounds like you timed it right then, David, to put your feet up, grab a libation, soft, hard, or otherwise. And so it's hot in the US, 83 degrees. But yeah, Humphrey's not mad keen on getting wet either, so we're not going to point the finger. But that's good. We're about to, a couple of minutes away from being live. So 20 degrees here, then sun and then rain. So it looks like you've probably got the same weather system as us. Natalie, I think it's a little bit further south, isn't it, than where you are, where this very, very high temperatures, this Cerebus heat event is being experienced. So yes, nice clouds. Yeah, so we've had some lovely sort of clouds and weather. I mean, those that joined me the other night when we had an accidental tour of near Robin Hood's Bay, but not Robin Hood's Bay, down at Ravenscar. Wow, those cloud formations there were absolutely stunning, right? Which just goes to show, doesn't it? You know, you make a plan to go somewhere and then you end up somewhere else and you have a great tour. So that's one of the eye for planning, I guess. But hopefully things will go largely to plan on this tour. It's the usual kind of walk around York this, but I thought we'd just start somewhere different. I was like to change it up a little bit so we can just sort of think about different things, different kind of ideas, and few different stories, so that it's not always the kind of same sort of tour. So hopefully, yeah, I really enjoyed Ravenscar, Tish. It was, as I say, it had been very stressy leading up to it because obviously didn't know if I was going to be able to get where I was going, didn't know if there's going to be signal because I've not been down there and tested, and didn't know quite how to get down to the waterfront. So all in all, it kind of was like, oh, gosh, at the time it kind of felt a bit stressy, but actually then, you know, gradually sort of bit by bit, it became fine. You know, it became quite nice actually. So let's have a look at settings on here. So just bear with me just a minute. I've brought my screen to try and show you some images, but it's not very bright. I wonder if I can just do brightness on here. I'm just going to put the thing down for just 1 minute, okay, on this little tripod. Just want to see if I can. If I can't get any brighter, there's not much point showing you because the sunlight is somewhat. So I'll tell you what. I'll turn you around, and then you can look at the nice flowers. So you look at flowers. And I will see if there's a way of making this any brighter. That's the problem. You're trying to look at something to find brightness, and you can barely see the screen, so not ideal, it has to be said. So it may be that we go without the pictures, but I'll look at that in terms of the next one. Our display, is that it? Adaptive brightness. That seems like it's a bit happier with that. So, are they pretty flowers? A nice place for us to start, eh? How nice is that for you? So, I think we can now... Yeah, fab. Great stuff. Yeah, that's going to work. So, lovely, lovely. Let's put that in my metaphoric and actual back pocket and say, let's spin you around. Hi, everybody. Welcome to York. It's lovely to have you join me. It is sort of Sunday tea time here, early evening on Sunday. So, whatever time it is where you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's lovely to have you with us. And I decided to start today's tour down on the sort of getting toward the eastern side of the city, just on the edge of the city centre. And you'll probably recognise one or two of the buildings, but let's just have a sort of spin round and have a look at what we can see. So, starting off, obviously, rather nice. And Anthony's Hall, going to talk about that in just a moment. But I've never shown you this before, but it's such an absolute delight. I thought starting by the Black Swan, famous coaching inn of York. The coaching inns, of course, on the main roads, allowing places to come and stable your horses, change the horses, high lethargy, and of course get accommodation, food. And that's what, of course, the pubs and the hostelries did, wasn't it? Was to provide travellers with the opportunity to bed down for the night, because these journeys often would take several days. So you might, en route to York, you might stay at Lincoln, you might stay in Hertfordshire, overnight out of London. So these inns, if you like, very much catered towards the needs of a travelling public. It is beautiful, isn't it, Rose? It's absolutely gorgeous. And so it's one of York's sort of premier historic inns. I'm just going to pan down this side. And it's famous. If anybody on here from Canada, you may have heard me tell you this before, it has a link to a very famous chap in your nation story, General Wolfe. His parents were the landlord and the landlady of this inn. So they ran this place. And it's widely believed that General Wolfe was conceived here. He was born in Rochester in Kent, but that was because they'd gone on to take over a pub in Kent. So General Wolfe, he of the St. Lawrence River fame, this is his kind of roots here in York. So we kind of claim as an honourable Yorkie. I'm just going to bring you up. You can see over here, we're talking about a 15th century pub. Very nice it is too. So if you come into York, do go and have a look at the historic charms of the Black Swan. You will not be disappointed. So a lovely place to eat, to stay. They have live kind of music in there, sort of folk acoustic stuff. So well worth the trip. So we'll just see the Minster in the distance. We'll be seeing the Minster later on the tour. And but let me just tell you a little bit about this building first. And we're going to look in the gardens. We're going to walk on the walls and mix it up a little bit today. So this is St. Anthony's Hall. And has anybody heard of St. Anthony? St. Anthony of Padua. St. Anthony of Padua was a very, very famous Franciscan monk and saint. So Francis of Assisi and all that. The Franciscans were what they called a mendicant, a wandering order, insofar as that they took, rather than a monastic life, where they lived behind the walls of a community, more of an apostolic life. So out, converting, helping, living with people, tending to their kind of needs. And they became very, very well endowed, this guild, the Guild of St. Anthony, which is who were granted this hall, because they came up as a cure for what is known as ergotism. And ergotism is a really awful skin disease. And it was very, very prevalent in the medieval period, particularly in Northern and Western Europe. An ergot is a mould that actually collects on rye. So long before kind of sort of wheat was widely used as a kind of food crop, you had the widespread use of rye being used for bread and so forth for cereals. And if you stored it badly and there was moisture, ergot would form. And it's widely believed that ergot, which is a kind of constituent element of LSD, the kind of hallucinogenic, it's often said or been suggested that actually ergot poisoning was responsible for the witch craze. That these women that were having kind of these hallucinogenic episodes was caused by the ergot. But ergot poisoning, when you eat sort of too much of this stuff, it brings the body out in terrible, horrible pustules. And I'm going to start the tour if I can just find my little screen here. There's a chap here, and this is from the portrait of Matthias Grunwald from The Temptation of St. Anthony. And there you can see him. He's a man in the advanced stages of ergotism. So you can see the festering kind of pustules. Patron of lost things, he is. St. Anthony is kind of seen as the best bet. If you're going to pray to somebody, pray St. Anthony, because he is the kind of miracle worker. So there you are, that's ergotism. And so because they had, if you like, founded a treatment for this terrible disease, ergotism, they were able to kind of fundraise very extensively in the gardens of St. Anthony's Hall, by the way, in case you wondered where we are. I thought we were walking on the gardens before we head out. Didn't realise all the scaffolding was going to be up, but nonetheless, have a little look at the plants. So they had been Franciscans, and I know it's not very pleasant, is it? And so Franciscans were an order of what they call mendicants. Look at the lovely lavender, isn't it beautiful? And so the mendicant orders were basically out in the community. Inspired by the apostles, they quite literally took the faith to the people. Founded by St. Francis of Assisi, of course, in the latter part of the 12th century, they became very controversial. In fact, they were almost declared to be heretics before they became hugely successful. And the reason for that was that they had eschewed all property, all wealth, and so they began to preach that the church should be poor. And the popes, the clerics, the bishops, the cardinals didn't like that one little bit. They felt that this was a huge threat to everything they built up, to their wealth, their standards of living, and so forth. And so they came very, very close to being declared to be heretics, at which point, of course, more of them would have been burned at the stake and martyred, but actually a good number were. And St. Anthony was inspired by the martyrs. 5 Franciscans that lost their life in Egypt inspired him to become a martyr. But instead of becoming a martyr, he became a hugely successful Christian saint, St. Anthony of Padua, one of the most important Catholic saints. So this guild here, this guild hall, is in his honour. Each of the guilds would have a patron saint to whom they would look upon for kind of good outcomes. Is it lovely, by the way, this garden? And I've brought you here a few times before, but some of you may not have been in this garden. An absolute kind of oasis of peace. We'll walk back on the walls there, so we'll look at it from above as well. But it's so often deserted, which is such a shame, because it's just this lovely little, as I say, oasis, great way of putting it, of peace. Not quite bang in the centre of York, but very, very close to it. And it just emanates calm. It's a really lovely place. Just come and spend some time, bite to eat, sit and have a chat with your friends, you know, read your book, whatever. It's lovely to know that these places are always going to here for us. And yeah, Fran, it's a lovely place to come, you know, and it's not difficult to find, but equally it's not obvious. You can easily walk past it. So that's both its kind of its charm and I suppose it's kind of its challenges. But let's go and have a look at St. Cuthbert's Church, which is just next door. So we'll keep that kind of faith thing going. So we started with the Franciscans, the Guild of St. Anthony. So in 1400, they were given a grant to build a guild hall in York with the Guild of St. Anthony, the Franciscans. They trailed everywhere with pigs, by the way. They farmed pigs, and wherever they walked, they had pigs trailing after them. So often they're portrayed with pigs, Franciscan monks. And so by the 1450s, they become so wealthy because of their scientific prowess with the cure of ergotism. They were given the money to build this hall, which unfortunately you can't see too well today. Been substantially built in the 18th century, but they built a very, very substantial guild hall. And this was a guild hall that was used for all the guilds that couldn't afford their own guild hall. So again, it became very successful insofar as it became a place for the floating guilds. not like the Merchant Taylors or Merchant Adventurers that had their own big Guildhalls. A lot of them much smaller and didn't. So it became the Guildhall for York, St Anthony's. It also became a prison, reform school, various things over time. So we're now at a medieval church, 15th century, much older, but rebuilt in the 15th century, of St Cuthbert. And you may have heard of St Cuthbert, talked about him in Durham. He's one of the very, very important early Christian saints in England. St Cuthbert's body and his remains were absolutely treasured. And he spent a great deal of time crisscrossing across England, following various Viking raids to protect the body and the remains of St Cuthbert. So very important, buried at Durham Cathedral. But the reason that I brought you down here is a kind of interesting little story, a little facet of English history that you might not be aware of, and it relates to this little door over here. So this is the main door, obviously, into the church, which quite unusually, actually, is on the north wall. Mostly it would be on the western wall. But this little door over here, you can see is much, much smaller than the main door, is something that is very rarely encountered these days. Most of them are bricked up. They're called devil's doors. And the reason for this is partly kind of shrouded in mythology, but also in kind of the fudge that was kind of pre-Christian and Christian coming together with a not especially well-educated public, if that kind of makes sense. So oftentimes, you get a lot of, like Christmas is a classic example, isn't it? Of kind of pagan stuff that's sort of become Christian, but nonetheless is very much based on pre-Christian, heathen, pagan ideas. And the idea was that at the point of birth, a child has original sin, it has the devil within it. And that the whole point of baptism is in actual fact a mini exorcism. So it's believed that once you kind of went through the formal part of a child's baptism, in effect you release the devil into the church. So consequently it was practiced to leave the door open on the north side, so-called devil's door, to allow the devil to escape. Now, there's questions about this because actually the most important part where the exorcism is done is at the back of the church, in the doorway, by the font. So you could actually say the devil could leave that way. So as with all these things, there's a bit of a kind of fudge in our understanding and our knowledge, but they're widely known as devil's doors. And the reason they were put on north sides of churches is that, again, in the oldest belief systems, the devil owned the north side of the church. You could only consecrate, if you like, three sides properly of a church. And this, of course, goes back to the belief system that when the devil fell from heaven, in effect, he took possession of the earth. The earth belonged to the devil. And this was absolutely believed by medieval Christians. To them, it was obvious. If you think about the temptation of Christ in the desert, when the devil offers him everything he can see, if it wasn't his to give, it wouldn't have meant anything. So it meant the devil actually owned the earth. And so consequently, the north side of a church was, once it was consecrated, was believed to belong to the devil. So for instance, in terms of burials, stillborn children, suicides, often murderers, and so forth, will be buried on the north side, where they weren't connected by God. They wouldn't have their feet pointing towards the east. So kind of forlorn place. So it's just a nice little kind of bit, so you can see here now, as I kind of pan around, the difference in sort of size there between the main door of the church and a little devil's door there. So I hope you enjoyed that story. It's a little explanation. So I thought I'd give a little walk on the walls. What are the metal grills next to the church wall? Couldn't see those. Probably just, if it's protection on the outside, it's probably protecting the glass, because unfortunately we do get incidents of both theft in terms of the lead, but also vandalism. It's not that common, the vandalism, but it's depressing when it happens, because obviously you're talking about medieval artifacts, and you think, what on earth do the kids get out of smashing it up? So if it was metal grills that you saw, there's every chance it was there to protect the medieval glass, because that's what we have in Legion in York. So if this gate is open, which I'm anticipating that it should be, but you never know until you actually get there, we're going to have a little walk on a section of the walls and take ourselves around to Monk Bar and then go around by the Minster. Yeah, we're open. So coming on at Layerthorpe Bridge. Are they bikes? Oh, I didn't actually see what you were talking to. Already kind of set off, so I do apologise. So I'm about to see the garden that we just left a few minutes ago, again from this side. So quite possibly bike stunts. So it's very kind of well located, is St Anthony's Garden, in terms of accessing the walls. So you can come for a section of walk on this bit of the walls from when you come one day, whoever else, and then come and have a sit down in the gardens. And when you're suitably refreshed, you can go inside and look at St Cuthbert's Church. So there you go. There's a little mini itinerary for you for an hour or two in York. So we're just going to come up. So again, we're seeing the side here of St Cuthbert's Church. One of 19 surviving medieval churches in the city centre. At one time there was somewhere in the region of 40, I don't know exactly how many, but 40 religious houses in York, in about a square mile, with all the major sort of faith groups represented, all the monastic groups, men, women. So you know, the Dominicans, Benedictines, Franciscans, etc., Carmelites, Poor Clares, everybody kind of represented, because York has such an important role in being a centre of fellowship for the Christian faith. So everybody had a spot here. Everybody wanted a piece of those pilgrims that were coming, particularly, of course, the pilgrims with good resources, a lot of money, and you know, of course, from there come the donations and the patronage and so forth. Yeah, about 1 square mile thereabouts, maybe slightly more. But yeah, it was many of them had monastic backgrounds. Or another reason that there's so many is you would have what do you call them now? Priory churches. Now, priory church is a church that belongs to an abbey that's in a different location. And the reason you might have a priory church is a bit like opening a kind of a branch of a store. Your head office or your main shop might be in the city, but in a kind of somewhere in another city you might open a second shop. And of course, what you're trying to do is take advantage of the footfall, of the kind of the interest in kind of faith and prayer and shrines and so forth. So lots of abbeys would see this as a kind of really good way to raise funds for themselves by opening up like branches in York. So consequently, this is why you end up with so many at this sort of critical period of time. Of course, the Minster remains coming into view now as the kind of the main focal point, but along with obviously the Benedictine Abbey of St Mary's and the Minster, about 40, thank you, religious houses. So various different sizes, some big, some small, some maybe with 20 or 30 brothers, monks, some maybe with half a dozen. But it's the concentration of them that I think that just captures the imagination that you're really kind of talking about, this sort of consolation. Lovely view of the Minster pointing through. And so coming up to the next building I want to kind of talk about on this tour here, which is the Merchant Tailors building. It's lovely sky, isn't it? Yeah. So the Merchant Tailors were another one of the guilds. So we're talking about St Anthony's Guild. So they're all faith guilds. Many of them were associated with one profession. So with the tailors, of course, it was cloth and clothing. Each had a patron saint. They were what were called confraternities. So this hall, by the way, dates to the early part of the 15th century, about 1415, but this brick facade was added later. It's added into the 17th century. So as we kind of come around the other side, you'll see a glimpse of what it would look like originally. So the patron saint, I don't know how well you can see down there, if I can sort of shoot up a little bit, you've got there the crest of the guild of the Merchant Tailors. And they are always represented by 2 camels. I'll do my best, Marlena. I'll find you a nice cottage. Does anybody know why you've got camels? I'd be most impressed if you do know. There's a famous saint, one of the most famous saints of all, is associated with wearing camel. And that is St. John the Baptist, described, memory in the Bible, as wearing a camel hair garment, a leather belt tied, And so because their patron saint was St. John the Baptist, you get camels within the crest there. I've actually got a picture, if it'll come up, of a stained glass window in here from the period of Queen Anne. So obviously a bit later than the original building, but nonetheless a nice, where is it? Oh, maybe I haven't. I can't find it actually. Never mind. So the merchant tailors then were obviously in charge of overseeing the cloth and textile business. And York was a major trading location for cloth. And that's because it's an inland port. I like that picture there with the chimney and the top of the Minster. It was an inland port. So consequently, York was about 40 miles from the sea. Camels are great fun, aren't they? And huge amounts of bundles of cloth, finished goods, would come through York on their way to the North Sea and then across to like where that is, in the Netherlands, Germany, Northwest Europe, the Sankt ports, not Sankt ports, sorry, the Hanseatic ports of kind of Germany. So a major trade route to Northwest Europe from York. It's pretty much straight across, you sort of hit Denmark, upper part of Germany, in pretty much kind of straight line from leaving of the Humber estuary there. So not hugely surprising. And of course, those trade links established all the way back in sort of pre-Viking period, really. So this gives you a sense, this end, of, I should wear a camel coat, shouldn't I? Of what it would look like before the brick facade was put on. So thankfully, this one end was left to give us a kind of sense of the original building. But as you can see down there, the brick facade gives it a really kind of slightly different feeling. So you're sort of led to believe when you look at it at first, it can't be that old, but it does. It dates from 1415, this building. But as I say, it's being clad over. So what we're talking about, churches over there. We've got a couple that we can see. We can just see the lantern tower of All Saints Pavement. What lights up on a night there. And over to the left, St Mary's. So we do get a sense really of the proximity of these medieval churches. A good number of them pulled down, many of them given other uses a long time, but it really was a kind of place of church spires, and towers were completely dominated the skyline. Very few other buildings would come anywhere close to them in height. So a bit like Oxford was the city of dreaming spires, isn't it? One imagines that York would have very much had a similar vibe in its day, with the views and these vistas very much uncluttered. Another, see, if you point down that one, you see in the middle of the screen there, we've got another church. So we're going to get, so close to St Saviour's, that one. So we really are sort of talking about, an absolute concentration of these medieval religious buildings. It's a nice bit to look at over here. There's a bit of the Roman fortress for you down there, beautifully excavated. Did it ever have a point about, well, some did, Emma, and some didn't. I mean, there are both sort of spires and church and towers, obviously, and there's no kind of firm reason as to why churches chose one over the other. But over time, the larger churches tend to have towers because they were better at hosting bells. You just got more space for the belfry. So I think that kind of sort of defined, when you talk about sort of the larger, big parish churches, generally speaking would have a tower. But I love a spire. We haven't got many in York. So, as I say, a bit of a section of the walls here. There's another church just down here, St Helen on the Walls, was just where that little conservatory bit on the end of the Merchant Taylor's Hall. There's a church right there. And but I love that bit of the Roman architecture. You can only see it from the walls. You can't even walk up to it. So it's absolute joy. And it just shows us on this illustration here where we are right up at the eastern corner tower of the Roman fortress. Multangular tower we've looked at in the museum gardens, and over here Bootham Bar, which I normally start this tour at. So we're right at the other side of York today. So let's walk on. Sorry, as they're keeping you waiting, I do apologise. So coming now towards Monk Bar. Church in Ormskirk has a tower and a spire. Yes, I've seen one or two of those, Mark. I mean, they're quite a rarity, aren't they? But yes, I've come across those before. You must assume, because it's hard to imagine why you need a church, a tower and a spire, but it obviously made sense then. So we're coming up to the first gateway that we're encountering on this tour, and this is Monk Bar. And Monk Bar is probably my favourite of the four main gateways of the city. Well, I say joint favourite, actually. One gate as well. And love the towers, but scared of heights. Right, well, you enjoy them from up here on the walls. It's pretty safe. At least on this section, we've got sort of rails, and it's kind of safe up here. So I think you'll be okay here. This isn't too high, but you get a sense of being able to look across the rooftops, which is kind of nice. I think we all kind of like that vista, don't we? Being able to sort of feel like you can sort of see across rooftops. And because with York it's so kind of mixed up, isn't it? You know, it's all kind of higgledy-piggledy. It's very satisfying, I think, you know, visually, rather than seeing something that's very, very kind of uniform and all kind of, you know, blended in the same way. York's not like that. It's, of course, it's just very, very sort of up and down, hodgepodge, and just charming, isn't it? In that we all look for a bit of hodgepodge, don't we? So coming down now the steps towards the kind of ground layer, and just looking up, so I'll show you the steps for those that like to know about accessibility and so forth, what it's like getting on the walls. I suppose the answer to that is you do need some degree of mobility. You're not going to get a scooter up here. So I'll show you, once you get up there, it's flat, but just so you can sort of judge for yourself, that's the kind of number of stairs you'd need to escalate to kind of get up to what we're going to say, probably maybe 30 steps or so, somewhere in that kind of region. So it's not absolutely huge, but nonetheless, and there's a rail, so I suppose you could stop along the way, but just so people can understand. So this is, I say, one of the four main gateways, and this is Monk Bar, of course, monk, monasteries, and so forth, very much on the theme what we've been discussing so far. But there's something, I think, extraordinarily beautiful about this particular gateway. It is sort of majestic, delicate, just kind of brings to mind, you know, the castles of fairy tales. You can understand why the Romantics in the 18th century just fell head over heels with York, because it's so easy to imagine Guinevere, or the Lady of Shalott, or Maid Marian in these surroundings. So it is beautiful, isn't it? And oh dear, well, you're back. So the figures on the towers are Victorian, but I don't know how it fit, again with the light, if you can see, there's a chap there on the right hand side and he's holding a stone. And this is kind of reflecting the fact that these were first and foremost, of course, defensive foundations. And originally there had been a secondary set of gates coming out to about where these traffic lights are over here, in what they call a Barbican kind of setup. But of course what it meant was that to be able to penetrate the city, to try and get inside the walls, you'd need to come very close to the gates where you could be attacked from above. And particularly under this kind of Gothic arch just underneath the crests has a series of what are known as murder holes. And murder holes, quite literally, as you can imagine, was pretty much what they did. Dropping very, very heavy weights onto invaders below. You'd be stuck in a very, very sticky situation. Just arrow slits, definitely. And again, that sense, that linking with the Christian cross, it need to be that shape. There's always that sense that God's on our side. People love to tell themselves that God's on their side. So just for those that like to read the bump, have a little photo, have a little look at that. Monk Bar, built in several stages. And during the reign of King Richard III, who's very much closely linked with York, it was extensively remodelled and rebuilt. So yeah, ouch, your headache. A beautiful vaulting up here. We normally come the other way, and if you remember, those that have been on my tours, when I come down these stairs here, generally, but that's where we have this kind of super narrow staircase, which is absolutely wonderful, but not great. And just getting a little spot of rain, which we were told wasn't possible, but just shows what the weathermen knowing. So I'll give you a little view of the kind of the rear of the gateway. Yes, so the later addition door in the Victorian era, when the walls were rebuilt. So the walls were systematically rebuilt and kind of remodelled during the Victorian era, partly because they were falling down, partly because of the damage that had been incurred during the English Civil War, which is the first war really where kind of cannon came into play. And once cannon and artillery came into warfare, then really it was, oh, thank you very much, that is most kind of you. That was, in effect then, the end of walls as a defensive structure, because obviously if a cannonball smashed into a stone wall, it's just as likely to collapse on the defenders as it is to keep out the attackers. So kind of cannon really kind of spelled the end of stone fortifications. They're in a pretty bad state, so they were rebuilt by the Victorians. Talking about buildings, this is a wonderful, delightful enigma of a building. It is known as York's Dutch House. Dutch House because it has architectural flourishes from the Flemish style. It's believed to date from 16 1948. There is no written record as to why the owner wanted it to reflect Dutch. May of course been some form of trading. We simply don't have the records to know. What we do know is originally there wasn't a staircase inside, it was external, which almost certainly meant it wasn't a place to live, it was a commercial building. So Fran, Marlene, I'm thinking maybe put this on your short list for a pad, but we'll not give firm decision just yet. We'll keep looking because there's quite a few very fine properties around here, but it oozes charm, doesn't it? It's really interesting. It could straight off be on Mark or Stefan's tours, couldn't it, from Amsterdam? Well, Natalie will recognise it. So called the Dutch House for a reason that kind of obvious, really. But it's not obvious that it is a Dutch house, but it's not obvious why it should be, if that can make sense. So it remains a delightful enigma. It was actually part of the brewery that was down here. They were going to pull it down, but it got a stay of execution in the 1950s. Thank goodness that happened. And it's now a very, very nice place to come and stay on your holidays. So if you've got deep pockets and you want somewhere kind of special to stay, then you're not going to go too far wrong with the Dutch House. And I believe that's just the name of the website. So if you want to have a look, go and look for the Dutch House York and you'll find it. A lot of scaffolding today. We seem to be stuck in a land of scaffolding, so I'll just kind of pan out and keep it out of the shop. So we're coming around Oglethorpe, coming to the Minster precinct now. And I've got Chapthouse Street in front of us. And this is the area of York that people tend to just kind of go a little bit weak at the knees at, if they find it. Not everyone finds this because it's a tiny bit off the beaten track. Not far, but enough. And people are very conservative. You notice this, you do in-person guiding, that, you take something, they might be in York for 2 days, and they, we didn't know this was here. And you think, well, you didn't do much exploring then, did you? And people have a habit of just sticking to the main routes and the kind of commercial areas where the cafes are and so forth. So that's what's nice about having a guide, obviously. You get exposed to places you wouldn't otherwise have found. But they're not difficult to find. You see how close we are to the Minster. And this is the wonderful Grays Court Hotel, one of the finest hotels in the city, in fact, one of the finest hotels in England. It won the Independent Hotel of the Year about 2 years ago, of all England. And it is, part of this has been lived in since the Norman conquest. So we continually habitated, that's the word, habited, since the 11th century. Now, much of what you're looking at here is much, much later in terms of the building itself. But in terms of continuous occupation all the way back to the 11th century buildings on this site. So it really is quite a spot. We're looking at the rear now of the Treasurer's House, the famous Roman ghosts of York. So the hotel is called the Grays Hotel. And this is York's Treasurer's House, which was the rear of the building and the man that was in charge of fundraising for the Minster. Isn't it lovely around here? So peaceful as well. Particularly if I stop talking. The lovely garden we've seen from the walls on tours previously. Waiting a lovely afternoon tea on the lawns. So it's a lovely place to come. So Grays Court, that's its proper name. So again, if you're looking and want somewhere to treat yourself, this would definitely be on the short list of places to consider. The rather grand lions there, as you can say, ushering you in to an afternoon of peace and quiet with a good book, maybe your art, if you're into drawing, sketching, some nice things to eat and drink. You could definitely while away an afternoon, good vowels at least in there. No problem. Very enchanting, absolutely. And I think that's a great way of putting it, is Ronnie. Enchanting is definitely how I describe this part of the city. It's as if you're in a little bit of a dreamscape where, and I've said this before, but it's worth repeating, it's almost as if the Industrial Revolution hadn't happened and that we're just walking through not so much a city, but a dreamscape, an alternative kind of possibility for what the world might have been like if it hadn't gone off down the kind of the modern route. We can just drink in the history. It feels like time stands still. Everything is kind of calm. And then you come around the corner and you're back in the modern city. But there's these little pockets of places almost trapped by the force of history. And Walmart is 80, there you go, 1081. Fabulous, Tish. It just goes to show, doesn't it, that it's almost like when something's so old, it leaves this kind of patina, not just in the physical environment, but in the atmosphere as well. We just get a sense of history on and of time just running so far back into the past that why do you refuse it? I mean, you don't, because you come to York because you love all that, right? But then just enchanting with all the lovely metalwork, gateways, the porticos, everywhere we look, we are absolutely enchanted. Very quiet places, Dov, absolutely very, very quiet. So that's the absolute kind of beauty of it. And this garden here, the Treasurer's House, we're not going to be able to get in. But again, if you're in York, it's open every day. A beautiful place just to come and relax, just chill out, have some you time by yourself, with a friend, companion. There's just so many nice little corners of York where, as I say, the prevailing mood, atmosphere is that of calmness, of stillness, and of history just being in the present. Like I say, if you said you were kind of walking through a stage set or a picture book, you'd kind of know what I meant. It's just got that sense. Not all of York, not by any stretch. There's lots of modern York as well. But these bits that I've been kind of showing you in the last few minutes have definitely just got that unique sense of being so much of the past. So here we are now, right underneath the shadow of the Minster, the central tower, the Chapped House there, completed in 1290, the oldest completed section of the Minster. We come around, we'll have a look at the East End, coming around, of course, into the famous St William's College. St William's College was a residential home for priests. So again, very fine properties around here, all belonging to the Minster. So it's founded in 1461, St William's College, and the benefactor, again, was Richard, Duke of Gloucester, before he became King Richard III of York, the King. So he laid down the resources, the money, to build this beautiful college. It's a college of the vicars choral, who were chantry priests. And chantry, from Latin incantare, sang the masses for the dead, because people fervently believed that after you died, most people didn't go to heaven or hell, they went to a place called purgatory, a place where you would be purified by fire. You hadn't done enough bad things to go to hell, but you hadn't done enough good things to go to heaven. You're in between the two. So you can have a miserable time in purgatory until all those sins are erased, until your soul is as light as a feather. Okay, and you can float up to heaven on Judgment Day. But what they believed was that other people could intercede on your behalf. They could pray on your behalf. They could pray for your soul. They could actually undertake your penance on your behalf. These are intercessions, and they were prayers that were sold. Very controversial, something that the Protestants, Martin Luther and so forth, very much dead against. The selling of vanities, this idea you could hand over cash to the church and that would equal atonement. But that was very much the industry that was here. It was St William's College, St William there, right in the centre, the patron saint of York. And St William had become a saint because he was the Archbishop of York, rather controversially, the King's man. And he came back to York after he'd been consecrated as the Archbishop, and a huge crowd turned out to see him arrive back in the city on Ouse Bridge. And just as he was approaching into the city, the bridge collapsed, and hundreds of people plunged into the icy cold river. This is the middle of winter. But he said a prayer, to Archbishop William, and unbelievably nobody drowned. This was the first belief of a miracle. The second was that he was buried and entombed in the Minster. Not long afterwards, the Minster had an enormous fire. Not this Minster, it was its predecessor. This is what led to the building of the second Minster. But they found St William's tomb inside the Minster, and when they opened the coffin, there was no sign whatsoever of any smoke or fire damage. And so, consequently, there was a sweet smell coming off him, and this was the second miracle set to him, so he became a saint. So my thesis, I thought that purgatory is more of a Catholic. Well, absolutely, you're 100% right. 360. We're talking about Catholic. All this was built during the Catholic era. So 1461, when this college was founded, we're in Catholicism. The Reformation doesn't start until the 1530s. And it doesn't really start in early till the 1540s. So we're still at that latter end period. So with all the money that was raised from selling souls, selling prayers for the dead, this was funded, this window, the Great East Window of York Minster, the largest expanse of medieval stained glass anywhere in the world. It was put in by Coventry Glazier between 1405 and 1408 at absolutely exorbitant cost. And it basically displays the top sort of third of it is God in his heavens with the archangels, the seraphims, the cherubims, the order of heaven. The bottom 2/3 then is the end of days, the apocalypse, the revelations of St. John, played out in kind of grisly detail. Lots of monsters, lots of suffering, lots of torment, the seas boiling, the dead rising from their graves, and so forth. So absolutely a reminder in this focal point, this centre of the Christian fellowship and faith, was what was waiting for us at the end of days. So this idea of getting your place in heaven was very much the kind of focal point. In fact, it's not over-egging it to say that during this period of Christendom, of the Catholic faith, the single biggest idea that ever really kind of captured European thinking was that the sole point of this life was to attain salvation in the next. And so everything was seen through this prism of faith. Everything was judged in terms of how is that going to impact on my final journey, upwards or downwards. So that was how kind of life was seen. And so what it meant, of course, was the church had an extraordinarily big influence over not just day-to-day life, but attitudes, social mores, cultural norms. It's at this point, of course, that women begin to be treated as, I'm not quite say second-class citizens, but very much, if there's an order that starts with the clergy at the top, women are nowhere near the top. So we kind of start to see the gender definition as well, sort of coming through this as well, which some people are very happy with, others kind of less so, but it's worth kind of mentioning it's very much kind of church-imposed order of society rather than a kind of natural state. So we're walking past now the mason's yard, of course, with a building of this size. So I sort of pan upwards, you can see all the scaffolding. Oh, there, hello, Natalie. You can see all the scaffolding. So there's a kind of constant process going on of renovation. There's nothing bad has happened, it's not falling down, but rather they'll kind of unveil a program of works. And for the next few years, they're going to be on this southern side, the southeastern corner. And then when they're finished, they'll move the other side of the south transept and they'll start over. It's simply got to a stage now where some of this building is over 800 years old. There's never going to be a time when there isn't a requirement for routine kind of maintenance work. So you're getting used to having scaffolding up is just part of having a medieval cathedral in your city. They did bring it down. The last time it was all down was actually at Millennium, which is lovely, in the year 2000. And what they also did as well, and if you have a look online, if you can find a picture, it was amazing. They took all the furniture out. So instead of being lots of chairs and resting places and tables and so forth, it was totally empty. And you get a size of quite a monumentally big the Minster actually is. But also that's how churches were. Pews and sitting down and sermons is a post-Reformation Protestant idea of sitting down and listening to these life lessons. In the medieval era, the Catholic era, everything was in Latin. It's pretty short. You weren't meant to understand it. Just do as you're told. Stand up, sit down, do as you're told. Right? You know, it's the priest that is doing everything. You haven't really got anything to do. Just take the sacrament. Just going to pan us around this. We're looking at the south transept here. You get a good view. You start to get really a sense, for those that haven't been, of quite how big we're talking about. I know I saw Natalie tour guide was on. It's lovely to have her with us. Always nice when we, yeah, very different, Trish. Without just so I say that, but that, as I say, would have been the feeling. So pews very much came in this country with the Reformation, with the idea that on a Sunday you're going to sit there in church and listen to the pastor, listen to the priest, listen to the vicar, and basically, you know, read an excerpt from the Bible, read a passage, and then overlay that in terms of what that means to your life. You know, how is that going to affect how you go about your business in terms of both your work as a husband, as a father, as a wife, a sister, a friend, and so forth. How do you turn the words of Scripture into the way of living your life. So because it took longer and they wanted people to think about it, it was all in English for the first time. It's a huge change. Don't forget, before the Reformation in this country, it was in Latin. You weren't meant to understand it. It was meant to be mysterious. If you've been to a Catholic church, you'll kind of still got that feel of it. The kind of incense, and the priest turns his back to the tabernacle. You can't quite see what's going on. They love a bit of mystery. That's at the heart of it, is the mystery of the faith. The Anglicans, the Protestants went the opposite way, and they wanted you to understand what was at stake. They wanted you to take responsibility for your own spiritual journey, your own spiritual outcomes. So saints are frowned upon. So one of the first and big differences that you see with the move away from the Catholic faith to Protestants is no more saints. You can't venerate saints. I will. Quick. Minerva.
What is it?
It's the statue of. I'll point it. Oh, just a bit. We see we've got Minerva, who is the Roman goddess of drama, wisdom, and poetry. She is there because of a big publishing network around here, and she's pictured around this side. A little owl, you may see. So there you go. You see the owl, ancient symbol of wisdom. So there were the books. So drama, wisdom, and poetry. Roman goddess. There we go. Hope I passed the test for you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. There we go. We do requests as well on these tours. If it's live, you can change what you do. So Stonegate, everyone knows, my favourite street in York. Just a wonderful sort of presentation of buildings, both ancient and messed around with. So Stonegate itself, so we've got the sign for it over here, Stonegate, we think was the first book. It's not always a mysterious. Lots of the Catholic Church linked to my school, ran out of communion ways. It's now culture. Well, there we go. Just because they try and make it mysterious doesn't mean it is a mystery, does it? And sometimes you say, Emma, light gets shone upon it. But I say that's the whole thing, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? You accept it. Whereas it's a rather different view of kind of faith alone belief of Protestantism. Read the scripture, put it into action. You're not going to go and do things like symbolic things like rosary beads. No, don't do that. This kind of recitation of kind of of the catechism. Not going to do that. Observing saints' days. Not going to do that. Pilgrimages. Don't do that. So it strips away, and also the good deeds kind of thing. You can't get into heaven by just doing good deeds. So it very much is a cultural change. It's kind of marked out over here, where we see 34 Stonegate. They were selling Bibles here in 1682. So again, this is a big symbol of that change. 100 years earlier, you could have been burnt at the stake for having a Bible in English. Okay, it's incredible. 150 years earlier, sorry, of how profound this kind of change is. So it drives literacy as well, because suddenly it's in English. You're supposed to read it, understand it. So suddenly literacy is an important thing, and of course, people are going from a very, very low base of education literacy. So it's a long time to kind of get that on. So you're in churches, and you'll see church from that period of time. We'll have boards with the Lord's Prayer, the Ten Commandments, and so forth. So written on the walls, trying to get people to understand what the words look like. So there's huge kind of social changes. Your picture's fine. Good. It might drop to shoot me for the examples. So we're coming into Coffee Yard. I was thinking actually, I might just do a tour based on the Stickleways. I came across my book the other day, an old signed copy I had, and I thought it'd be fun maybe to do a tour of the Stickleways, take down as many as I could, all in one tour. So Barley Hall, we've been here again many times. So for those that like to kind of get a sense of where we are, where it kind of links to, Barley Hall famously, of course, was nearly destroyed. They were going to demolish this in the 1980s. And at that time, it was totally covered with external buildings. So a bit like when we saw the Merchant Taylors' Hall earlier, remember all the brickwork at the front? So complete fascias had removed all this distinctive medieval look for it. And so consequently, it just looked like old, knackered Victorian buildings, kind of shanty buildings. So they're going to pull it all down. But then as they began to take it down, like layers of an onion, they slowly reveal what's here behind. And so extensive work. So most of this timber here is replacement. In fact, if I come over here, you can kind of get a really good sense and see the difference between the timber from the 1980s and the much older historic timber. So there's not so much of the timber left, but isn't it just amazing? It's just beautiful. So again, it came so close to being lost, and it's just amazing that it was found and it was saved. So it passed on to, it was originally like commercial developers, but then once they realised what they got, it passed on to the Archaeological Trust, and so all this is now held in trust for the people of York. And so, it's wonderful what they've done. If you come into York, do visit Ballyhall. We're actually talking to them about doing a tour inside Ballyhall. One you have to pay for, but hopefully do let me know if you'd be happy to pay £5 or something to kind of watch a tour from the inside, and we'll take a tour from the inside because that's something they're quite interested in doing. So do let me know if that would be of interest. But it's a beautiful 15th century house. Yeah, so do I, Candy. So I think it's, and of course, that's what York is. Make no mistake, York is a preserved city. It is I'll show you that. We're going to Swinegate. It's a pig market. So yeah, York is very much preserved. So if it had just been left to its own devices, it would have collapsed and fallen over by now. So almost every building that you look at, every old building, has had a systematic program of maintenance over the years to keep it upright, keep it standing. The very early kind of photography of York, so 1860s, that sort of period, shows a city that is dirty, is kind of collapsing, is falling down. But luckily, that begins to coincide with this period of the Romantics, this fascination with the medieval period, and so people want to come and take responsibility for these old streets, old buildings, and you begin to see a tide of philanthropists, particularly kind of wealthy traders and merchants, usually rich individuals rather than the corporation, doing it, taking over buildings to build kind of palatial, medieval, romantic homes for themselves. And so this is kind of what begins to, if you like, kickstart the full-scale kind of renovation of York. And a lot of it was then leveled to the ground. I mean, this street down here is kind of mostly Victorian on this side, quite modern on this side, because some buildings got such a stage where they literally were just collapsing. There was nothing else, they could do, so it's better to just raise to the ground and start again. But there is an astonishing amount of York that has been saved and preserved. So when you come, you can really experience one of the most kind of, I suppose, complete sets of medieval city streets anywhere in the city. The piggies, yeah, well, on the Swinegate, and it's funny. In German, of course, Schwein means a pig, and pig meat or pork, and so from that period, Schweingates, they were named Anglo-Saxon Viking period. When the French came, or the Normans, not quite the same thing, and came, and obviously the Norman conquest, William the Conqueror and so forth, they were much more delicate. They didn't like the idea of a pig and pig meat having the same name. So we now get pig and pork, lamb and sheep, and so forth. Hen and chicken. The meats and the animal are given different names. They can have a separation in the French, rather more sort of cultured. But in German, Schwein does for both, with pig and pork. So it can be pork market, or pig market, however you want to call it. Yeah, so that's what Swinegate is. So, of course, with York being a very much sort of focal point for pilgrimages and for traders, for merchants, for markets, always lots of people here, so lots of demand for food. So consequently, for the inns and so forth, the places to eat, always a big demand for meat. So consequently, people bringing their animals here to the city, and that in turn as well, then brought a lot of money into the city. It would cost 3 pence to bring an animal into the city. You have to pay the tax in advance. So you'd have to sell your animal at market even if it was a bad price day, because you're not going to take it back and feed it. So consequently, York was making money whether you made money at the market or not, because the taxation was being placed on animals coming into the market for slaughter. Apologies to any vegetarians or vegans on, but they were simply talking about the past, although it's not that different now, I suppose. So Gudrun Gate, the gates. So the gates named after the Nordic term Gata, meaning street. So most of York was named during its period of Viking occupation. So the Viking, I'm glad you enjoyed this. The Viking occupation starts in the year 866, well 865 actually first, where the Vikings first come and take York by force, although the army isn't really here. And it's the three sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. So fans of the Vikings, we'd delight to know, Halfdan Ubbe and Ivar the Boneless led an army which took York to avenge the death of Ragnar, their father, and they sought out then to capture and put King Aella of Northumberland to the sword for his role in the death of Ragnar, which of course they did the following year in 867. And then for the next 200 years, York was the capital, the focal point of what became the Anglo-Scandinavian Empire. The city of Jorvik, as it was known, was the capital city, the cultural centre, the military centre, the ruling centre, the economic centre. The palace, the Viking Kings, was just in front of us, just over here, or rather to the left of us, on what's known as King's Square. So underneath that stone, the Viking palace. Unfortunately, you've got a medieval church that was built on top of it, which is no longer there, which means it's consecrated ground underneath, which means that ethically it's very, very difficult to excavate. So that's why we haven't got a Viking museum right there. Candice loves the show. The Vikings, well, as I say, three of those characters very much here in York. So we now come into the Shambles. We start to wrap towards the end of this tour. Nice and quiet for a change. The last few times I've been down here, including Saturday morning, I took a group. Oh my goodness me, it was so busy, could barely move. So it is really rather nice, of course, to they have a license. You know, it's entertainment, isn't it, as well as history. The Vikings, but it's a rollicking good yarn, isn't it? So it's lovely to see the Shambles in such a way that you can appreciate without so many people in there. I've talked about this so many times. You can probably do this kind of bit of the tour for me. You'll remember this is a street of the butchers with a livestock market over on our kind of right-hand side. So people are bringing their animals and they're fattened up to slaughter, held in pens in the livestock market, which is to our right-hand side. And then at the time they're needed, but only right at the time they're needed, they're brought through, slaughtered, then butchered in the street. So we know this central row of the Shambles in blood and entrails, the byproducts of the butchery business. And of course as well, because it was a butcher street, this led to this unique design. Even by medieval standards, these streets are crazy close together. And it was to create the environmental conditions by which meats could be preserved the best it could. There's no fridges, there's no freezers. So we're having a very narrow street, we're having canopies running across the top of the units. It would keep out most of the light. If we're looking for signs of this butchery trade, they're all there to look for. So you'll also see up here, meat hooks, where they are, meat hanged, suspended. These what look like shelves or seats, called flesh shambles, an Anglo-Saxon term, literally a flesh shelf. So each of these you'll see has got the flesh shelf, the flesh amel. If we go into this particular one over here, we've actually got Victorian meat hooks, because right into the beginning of the 20th century, this was still a major meat market. So again, if you just know where to look, you can see all these signs of the butchery trade. But of course, it's important to recognise that you couldn't have kept your meat very long. 3 or 4 days maximum. Think about the old days, like a meat safe. So you can't keep it that long, but you can of course then air dry it, you can pickle it, you can salt it. There's various things you can cook it, of course. But ultimately you can't keep it fresh for long. So in terms of what they're trying here was through architecture to create the environmental conditions that would give them a little bit longer the window, if you like, of being able to sort of control meat. So it's kind of really sensible. Eyes purple crying. Oh dear. What a shambles, absolutely. First saw it, instantly loved it at 7 or 8. Yeah, I mean, it captures us, doesn't it? You know, there's something about this place. And as well, of course, you know, the rest of York that enchants us, that kind of charms us. You know, I never take it for granted. I guarantee that there isn't a time that I come into York and there isn't something that either I've not seen before, or I just catch a glimpse of, and my heart just almost skips a little beat. I hope that kind of passion and pride comes across, comes out, so that you're kind of aware. I'll just come down here. So this is one of the routes into the livestock market. So yeah, I never take it for granted. It never. My love for it is always rejuvenated. Every time I see it, it reminds me why I love it so. And that even though I love being elsewhere, I had a fantastic weekend in London a couple of weeks ago seeing our eldest daughter, there's something about York that just offers, I think, a unique quality of life, a unique environment. It is a wonderful space, and it's so great to be able to see people either on the other side of the screen, as in here, or in person, just be enraptured by it, captured by it, and just fall for its charms over and over. And that's not to say everything's perfect here. Of course, that there are difficulties. Expensive to live here and so forth, particularly for young people getting started. And of course, there's not the money in the local authorities to pay for the work he's doing, and the business don't want to pay for it. But there's a lot more right than wrong. I think it is a remarkable place, a remarkable kind of success story as a city that's reinvented itself. It was largely industrial. When I was leaving school in the 1980s, we had, chocolate factories, we had train makers, we had armaments manufacturers, engineering, all gone. Really now, apart from a bit of life sciences and knowledge, essentially it's tourism and hospitality that is the main economic driver of the city. And that's a big ask. That's a tough one to kind of pull off, but I think York does it extremely well. And so I think we'll just have a little one down. What time is it for time? We're okay. We're just going to go another few minutes. I think we'll finish up down by the castle if we can, I think. And living in York, more affordable other places. It depends what you're comparing it to, Candice. I mean, obviously, if you're comparing it to, Bradford or somewhere, then obviously it's a lot more expensive. But comparing it to London or international cities, then no, it's not especially. It's the difference between what comes in and what goes out. So if you can find a way to make it work, like so Janie, our friend, not sure if Janie's on today, but she's come up here and kind of found a way to make it work. So I think there's a food inspector. Right, yes, well I suppose that would change things. Halal meats and how different treatments, of the slaughtering process and so forth. Yeah, and so this is kind of interesting. This is a kind of nice spot. This is Lady Peckett's yard. Beautiful Elizabethan mansion down here. But it's what's kind of really interesting is it really kind of shows how the rich like to live. A little courtyard, thank you, Leslie, of kind of removing themselves a bit from the main drag, away from the noise, the smells, the kind of danger, the poo, and so forth. And so this is how they kind of like to be a little bit removed. But the same today, isn't it? Like little gated communities want to be city central, but then that a little bit withdrawn. Nothing's really changed. Human nature hasn't changed all that much. So coming around into Fossgate, the wonderful smell here, talking about different cultures, a fantastic Indian restaurant, and the smell is just driving me nuts. It's just unfair. I think if you put these wonderful smells into the environment, you should give people free curries, because you're creating this astonishing kind of demand, and I'm somewhat powerless to kind of resist. I absolutely love Indian and kind of South Asian food, so it's absolutely my thing. And we're very well served in York because of the number of visitors. So here we are on the ever charming Fossgate. That's the Electric Theatre, York's first cinema. Over on the left side, I love the kind of Palladian. When they started off, they were just kind of starting to really connect. They were very much competing with the theatres. So the original cinemas were incredibly grand. People get dressed up, wear kind of their evening clothes to go to the cinema. The Electric Theatre, the first cinema in York. And so we're coming down Fossgate. We're about to cross the River Foss, the second of York's two rivers. And we're going to wind up the tour just by the castle. So stick with another 5 minutes and you'll be on your way. You might have heard the seagulls there in the background. Unfortunately, with all the rubbish that accumulates in the city, the birds have found why bother trying to go out to sea and competing for the dwindling fish stocks when you just live in a city and feast on the rubbish, the garbage, the overnight takeaway food that inevitably gets dumped in bins or on the streets and so forth. Is feeding an urban population of everything from foxes to seagulls to rats. So I suppose cities are going back to closer to what they would have been in years gone by, no longer the pristine, clean things. Unfortunately, our desire for quick, easy food, particularly when people have had a drink. And the byproduct of waste it creates an environment that is very, very easy for urban vermin to live off. So that's why they're here. People get surprised, but it's the way we live. Anyway, mini lecture over. Seagull that knocks on our door wants to. Yeah, absolutely, John. I mean, this is we've taught animals why bother to go searching. Why bother to try and go and find? If you're a fox, why bother chasing down a rabbit? It's been half the night chasing this thing that can, like, sprint, running in the dark. When you can just wait till York quietens down, crawl into there, and you can eat whatever's in there: burgers, pizzas, you name it. So, unfortunately, we've just created a kind of food source that is so easy for these animals. Why would they bother to return to their native environments? You can't blame them, really, can you? So consequently, if you're in York on a night, it's quite surprising. There's lots of little eyes. You sort of catch a bit of movement, an eye, they kind of shake. But that's city life, right? And York is no different to any other city in that respect. Of course, there's a lot of things that define York as different, but in the main respects, it's just the same as anywhere else, insofar as that we've got lots of rats and foxes and stuff. But anyway, so we'll finish up down by the castle. Shade over time, but not too bad. So walking now down the side of the River Foss. It's, top of the chat is those that want to make a contribution. That'd be lovely, thank you, I'd really appreciate that. It helps a great deal, particularly given the horrible cost of living right now. But I know you feel it too. So if you're not in a position to do so this time, don't worry, I know you will in the future. So you have this one on me. So this is the River Foss, the sort of second of York's sort of two rivers. And famously, when King William I, William the Conqueror, conquered York in 1066 first, then again in 1067, 1068, 1069, a bit of a pattern forming there, because the Vikings kept coming back and retaking control, is he built himself a castle between the confluence of the two rivers, and then flooded it, creating a huge moat. So all this side of the city would have been underwater as part of a moat. A moat working like walls, of course, as being another form of defences, whereby you can then create a defensive structure that prevents boats coming in. So gateways and chains were installed across the river, because the river from this point onwards is now 40 miles to the North Sea. And as I mentioned to you earlier, across the North Sea, you've got kind of Denmark. So consequently, that was the back door to the Scandinavians, to the Vikings. So what William was seeking to do when he built these two castles here, one of which still remains, one of which was gone, was to close the door to the Vikings, because it was the only way he was going to establish this as part of England. And interesting, it's not until sort of 1066 or even 1069 that York becomes part of this idea of a nation called England. England had been around for probably 300 years, in one shape or form before that, but York wasn't part of it. So there's no Uhtred, Bernard Cornwall, the last kingdom. This is what they're talking about, the last kingdom to fall. It had been Viking, it had been Anglo-Saxon, it had been a separate province under the Romans. So this southern dream of the Saxons to pull it together as one country of England wasn't possible until such time as York, Northumbria kingdom, fell to the power of the south. And this castle, if you like, represents that. Often used to kind of surprise me as a kind of kid when everybody talked about 1066 and kind of as if history sort of started then. And of course it did, lots of things happened before that. But you can sort of see why it's so significant, because it's the first time, or in the years after 1066, whereby this idea becomes reality. One nation of England, under one monarch, under one church, under one system of rule, under one language, mostly French, and one kind of form of sort of control. So consequently, that's why 1066 has got such a sort of a totemic importance in this country. And it's got particular relevance for York, because it's the beginnings of York, England, rather than York, Northumberland, or Jorvik, or Iforwick, or Iberacum. Wherever it was before, from this point onwards, it became part of England. And so that's where history typically starts in this country. But it's where this tour must end. Under Clifford's Tower, the remainder of the Norman Castle built here at York. And I thank you very much for your time with me today. I've very much enjoyed your company. The rain has stayed off. The Wi-Fi has behaved itself, I think, for the most part. And so that's ticks all the way. And we even had the presence, if you're still here, Natalie, a fellow colleague, which is lovely. And so I do hope you enjoyed it. I hope that, remember to like, give me a follow if you don't already on YouTube when this video kind of goes live, because that's kind of really helpful. Just trying to get those numbers up. Very close at 4,000 hours now, but obviously they're going to find another 4,000 hours next year. So, you watching the videos is really kind of really helpful. So, thank you everybody that's joined me. I've really enjoyed doing it, and I'm going to say thank you from York. I'll give you one last shot of. I'll pan it round for you so you can just see where we are. The castle on the hill. Thank you, Embin. Here we go. There we go. Castle on the hill. Thank you, Dawn. I'll just pan around. Still got that smell of wonderful Indian food in my nose. It's just unfair. The carousel in the middle. The Castle Museum. Former county jail. Centre of our picture. And of course, York's Crown Court. Still used on a daily basis to try serious crimes. So that's where we are. We're at the eye of York. And so, aye, the belly. Absolutely. I'm going to say my goodbyes. Thank you one and all. And hope to see you all very, very soon. So thank you for joining me. Do like, do subscribe, do comment, do all those things that I meant to actually do and always forget. And if you've been able to leave a thank you, I really appreciate that. Genuinely do. Don't take it for granted. And I bless you. Those that haven't been able to this time, I know you will when you can. So thank you everybody from York. Thank you for supporting the Guides Collective. Encourage guys to get on the calendar. It's the easiest way to find stuff. And I will see you all very, very soon. So thank you and goodbye.